now it's time to go to our main speaker this evening. Very, very excited about this. It's Sarah Lou Newman. Hello, how you doing, Lou? You all right?
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thank you. You had a little bit of issue getting in there, but you're here now.
I'm here now. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's great timing though, because you were here just in time for it, so that's absolutely fine.
Good.
So, Luke, would you like to just sort of talk about maybe what you're kind of researching, what your study is, and what you kind of want to talk about today?
Yeah, so I'm Lou. I'm an artist and an educator, and my background is working as a curator as well as my own art practice. But I also have run a art school and art classes for adults and children, and also I have worked in sort of feminist organizing and thinking groups and networking. So I've done a little bit of sort of lots of random things all under the umbrella of kind of arts and using art to talk about social justice issues, even feminism, topics about gender, just all kinds of different aspects and different kind of points of view around these subjects. And what I do is I use art. So I usually use examples of existing art or artists who look at those kinds of subjects within their work as a sort of starting point to facilitate really awkward conversations, things that people maybe find really hard to talk to others about, to get their own heads around, and primarily to talk to their own children about. So I'm currently studying a master's at St. Martin's, and I'm doing a project that is more specifically about using art to facilitate conversations about porn. What I'm trying to do is get people to kind of contemplate and think about our kind of wider cultural relationship with pornography, for various reasons that I'll to shortly, but partly because it's something that we consume at a huge level and all have a very personal relationship with, but we never really talk about, just how influential and how present it is in our lives. Anything else that we would consume at this level, we would talk about. And often when you talk about sort of wider conversations about sexual harassment or violence against women and girls, we'll kind of cite porn as an issue, but then that's sort of the end of the conversation. So what I'm really interested in at the minute is just exploring how we feel about this subject, how we want to talk to our kids about it, in order to kind of break down any kind of perpetuating sort of negative inherited kind of issues or shame or stigma, particularly if you're looking at your own experiences from when you were growing up and wanting something different for your children.
It's interesting. I was watching a documentary on iPlayer yesterday about Mary Whitehouse and her campaign to, first of all, clean up TV, and then she took on the porn industry as well. And her idea was just to get rid of it, obliterate it, completely get rid of it.
Yeah.
Would that work if there was some way of just banning it? Would that kind of work for us as a society?
I'm one of the things I would like to preface this whole conversation with, in fact, is saying that I'm not coming at any of this at a point of view where I'm saying that porn is bad and we shouldn't look at it and it shouldn't happen and it shouldn't, exist, because I think that's really naive. There's nothing wrong with being sexually curious. There's nothing wrong per se with pornography. There's nothing wrong with watching it, but it's more about two sides of it. Our kind of the difficult kind of liminal space around sort of fantasy and reality, and then also porn for profit. Essentially it's $1 billion industry, and therefore it's always going to be problematic. It's almost completely unregulated, which is another thing I can get into shortly, but there is almost no legal ramifications for uploading whatever content you want. And big porn is basically one company owns most of the porn on the internet, and they have the power to just kind of evade any kind of legal restraints. They can do what they want. It's like 30% of all data on the internet is porn. So, yeah.
Right. And it's a particular importance to parents, because you've got some kind of pretty shocking statistics really about kids and porn.
Yeah. which I find is difficult within this project. Like, again, I'm not trying to come here and tell anybody A, what to do, or B, what to look at, or what anything like that. And but also it's really hard to keep a really balanced conversation sometimes, because there are some really horrible, scary statistics about the kind of reality of the business of porn, for sure.
So, so what is it that you wanted to talk to us today about then?
So I'm just going to start with a few. I mean, I sort of told you about my project, so I was going to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing, but I've done that already. And then I was going to start with a few facts, and I'm really interested to hear from everybody their point of view as well. I've got hopefully get some feedback as well after the session, because for my own research, that's really, really helpful to me. And just talk a little bit about kind of the difference between sort of mainstream online porn and what is sort of termed ethical pornography, and sort of ask some questions about whether or not we think we can consume porn in an ethical way. And then also I've got a few sort of hopefully helpful things to say about sort of how you might approach talking to your kids about that. Normally in my workshops, I would show a lot of artwork, but I'm not going to do that today, because I just think we haven't got as much time. We could easily spend 45 minutes talking about one piece of art, and so I thought I'd just sort of do a bit more of a like overview. So can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to. It's say down at the
I just
bottom. You
hit
should have
share
a
down there.
share. Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's see, share screen. Not working. Oh, it's telling me to do something. Hold on. Yeah, can you see that? Share.
I can't see it at the moment. No.
StreamYard. No. Preview. Oh, here we go. Oh, it needs me to give you permission. Go to some... Sorry.
That's all right. It's good. This is the. I mean, up until now. This has been almost slick compared to normal. So actually, people don't mind a bit of. It's usually me fiddling about, going, can has anyone got the little button that lets them go on the live and stuff? That tends to be what most of these Dadless Soul sessions are. So, a little bit of computer admin during it is absolutely fine.
I know, and we're all getting so good at it over the pandemic. Right, now let's see if that will let me do it. Share screen, entire screen, Chrome tab. Will that work? No. Oh, here we go.
I can
it's
see
down here in the...
All right. If I press add to stream, I think this might come up. So
okay.
There we go.
Oh, great. There we go. Okay, so let me move that over so I can still see you. Why should we talk about porn? What I would like to do is sort of clarify, when we use this sort of catch-all term porn, I'm really talking about kind of, the junk food of porn. We're talking about the stuff that sort of, the first stuff you look at when you're getting to Pornhub or any kind of larger mainstream site, any kind of pop-ups, all the kind of just like junk food McDonald's of porn, the stuff that's just sort of thrown at you very easily. You're only ever sort of 6 clicks away from it. So whilst I'm using the term porn just in our conversation, obviously that can be very different things, but we're talking predominantly about the more kind of violent, misogynistic, racist, ableist, the kind of worst of the worst. We also have to talk about the links, the proven links. There's all sorts of research out there that has been done that has shown proven links that excessive use of pornography leads to like dehumanization of women and girls. It leads to sexual assault and violence, erectile dysfunction, addiction, depression, alienation, negative body image issues. There's no safe sex practices shown in mainstream porn. There's very little pleasure, very little consent. There's no regulation. It's affordable, it's anonymous, it's accessible. There's insane links to sex trafficking, to revenge porn, which is something the government are now trying to kind of legislate around, revenge porn. And filmed rape and assault, and a lot of child sexual abuse imagery and child sexual trafficking. Obviously, what I've just thrown at you is like quite large and scary to think about, and definitely one of the things we have to kind of factor in our ethical choices in any sense is kind of our relationship to that. So I'm not here to be like, don't watch it and it's all bad and you must, it's all linked to all this stuff. But there is all of that under the umbrella of what, porn in this wider sense. So it's important to kind of think about that and label that and talk about that at the beginning of this conversation. Yeah, as I said before, we look at it and consume it at huge levels. So here's my first horrible fact: the average age to first see hardcore porn on the internet is 9 to 11 years old. So no matter what kind of restrictions or parental controls you think you have, I mean, I should clarify this. I have 3 girls, so I have a almost 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. And parental controls are all well and good, but they are not fail safe, and it's really easy to just think, oh, I've done that thing and then I put it on there and it's all going to be fine and I don't have to think about it anymore. But as soon as your child interacts with devices of any kind, leaves your house and goes to someone else's, goes to school, anyone with a device of any kind can show them anything. So, and also the technology is advancing. There's lots of technology out there that is deliberately built to circumnavigate parental control. So I think it's really important not to just think that you can rely on this one sort of safety net and not have to have any kind of conversation with them until they're older, or think about it until they. Pornhub receives more monthly visits than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined, which is a statistic that I find really interesting. I think it's I don't think we really quite realize the extent of how much is on there and how much we're really looking at it until you hear a statistic like that puts it into context. 30% of all data transported across the internet is porn. I said that before. It actually has the same carbon footprint per year as Belgium, I read the other
day. Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, they could be more, but yeah. Research has found a direct correlation between excessive porn use and an increase in dehumanized perception of women and girls, as well as a high likelihood to commit sexual assault or harassment. And again, this is extreme cases. We're talking about, an excessive use of porn. And it's not necessarily just, the occasional looking in. But one of the things I think this particularly is relevant to is this idea of addiction. When young people whose brains are still developing, your brain doesn't stop growing until you're 21. When young people and children in particular start to look at or see this kind of imagery really early on while their brains are still developing, it primes them for addiction, not only to porn, but to all kinds of things later on, because what's happening is that kind of laying of neural pathways in the brain is becoming primed for addiction, for that dopamine hit. And porn is made to be, it's a at the end of the day, so it's meant to, it's meant to be consumed, and it's meant to be addictive, essentially, in the same way that social media is, or any other kind of dopamine, endorphin rush that we might get, which is, important to remember as well when you're having that conversation with your kids, potentially, is that, you can kind of explain to them, and I've got some more notes on this later, but again, about, made to be arousing. It's meant to be enticing. We're meant to want to look at it. And so for a kid, it's going to be much harder to understand that kind of thinking brain response and that physical response. You might be physically aroused to what you're seeing, but then also be quite scared and not really know what you're seeing as a young person, and not know what to do with what you're seeing. And therefore, it can be really difficult to manage those two conflicting feelings. So again, porn is laying that kind of groundwork for addiction, and that's really common. So there's erectile dysfunction addiction in grown men with excessive porn use is becoming a massive increasing problem. Here I've got some facts. This is from Exodus Cry, who are got some really interesting documentaries on YouTube, which are more pertaining to the relationship to mainstream porn, to trafficking, and to sexual violence. But according to studies, 10 to 15-year-olds consuming violent pornography are 5 times more likely to be sexually aggressive than non-viewers of violent porn. In males as young as 14, a correlation was confirmed in several studies between frequent pornography viewing and an accepting stance towards raping a girl. So again, this is sort of going to talk about this mainstream violent porn and the normalization of things that were considered quite niche and quite extreme, not all that long ago. But we're talking about generation of children who have grown up with access to internet pornography, and through that, the normalization of violence. So I was reading a statistic this morning that says 40% of women have experienced either like violent choking or sort of constraints or aggressive behavior in a consensual sex. So it's not even a question of assault and really, the darker sort of interactions, but even in consensual sex, there can be, if there's a lack of communication, you're more likely to recreate what you see in pornography in your real life. So even in a consensual situation, those boundaries can get crossed if there's not enough kind of conversation about, what you would like or what you don't want to have in your interactions. And there we go, another one. 9% of British women, I forgot the I in there, sorry. British women were victims of street harassment between the ages of 11 and 17 years old. So one of the reasons that I've started getting into this project and looking sort of at this area was because I had initially started looking at kind of statistics around street harassment for young women and girls, particularly the rise of it in schools. So not only in high schools, but in primary schools also, there's been a massive rise over the last sort of 5-10 years of harassment in school, sexual, either kind of verbal harassment or physical harassment. And I don't know if anyone has heard of Everyone's Invited, but I urge you all to go and look at that website, which is an amazing, huge community of testimonials of experiences of sexual harassment in schools, and also not only peer-to-peer, but also how those schools and education system has failed anyone who's then spoken up about it. And one of the major problems I think we have in this country is that our education system, obviously they are just backed into a corner and they have no resources. They have very little to work with. I have the utmost respect for teachers because they are doing important work on, breadcrumbs. But, the RSE curriculum that is being rolled out in schools at the moment is the new sex education curriculum this year is the first year that it has been updated in 20 years. So the government have only just now begun to address any of these issues and any, sort of more general sex and relationship stuff. So like sex education in the UK is not centered around pleasure. We don't talk about, for example, clitorises or female pleasure, because female pleasure isn't centered in procreation. So up until now, sexual education has always been centered around procreation and the act of conception, and therefore women's pleasure has never been considered.
Is there a reason for that at all, do you think? Or is there?
I don't know. I think it's just like just wasn't considered important to update it, or it's just so people just felt it wasn't difficult to I don't know. There's no good reason. There's no good excuse. I don't know why I'm trying to defend them. Yeah.
Fascinating, really, isn't it? That doesn't, in the modern day, that's not even a consideration that people thought.
No, completely. Actually. And so now we'll talk a lot about online safety. Consent is paramount in schools now. But also what is interesting is there is a basic framework that the government have given schools to work with, but then the schools are supposed to kind of elaborate on it at their not at their leisure, but as much as they want. They're not really being given a lot of good guidance to really expand on it. So even though it is a new updated curriculum, it still has a lot of space to be better, basically. One of the big problems I think that we have is that schools have they have so much safeguarding around this that they can't really have those conversations they want to have. I went to some sex education workshops in as a boys' school. I was working with some year 9 boys along with a charity that I've been doing some work with called Beyond Equality, who are a great charity who work with men and boys to do with toxic masculinity and male violence. And the boys wanted to talk about it, the guys doing the workshop wanted to talk about it, but there was just only so far they could go. The safeguarding just means like they weren't allowed to really have the conversation the boys needed. It was really interesting and a shame, but also quite hopeful. I mean, they were great kids, and I was really impressed with, you know, having worked with a lot of parents too, I was super impressed at the amount of kind of vocabulary and nuanced discussion those 13-year-old boys could have. And that's obviously only a small handful of, they were quite privileged private school kids working with this charity, but having worked with with their parents, you know, more broadly, you know, a lot of them can talk about this stuff in a way that their parents just can't. You know, I've had workshops with mums and dads, and a lot of the time, you know, I've had guys sit in those workshops and just not say a word. You know, it kind of goes either way. Guys either they just haven't wanted to say anything and they'll just sit and listen, which is absolutely fine, or they get really stuck into the conversation. But I think technology in particular as well is a huge problem here. Like the tech gap really makes this so much harder for parents and children because our experiences are so different. Like we did not grow up in this environment. We did not grow up with this access to all of this hardcore, you know, it was all kind of, you know, finding your dad's porns or your brother's, you know, VCR, or, you know, I've had loads of dads talking about finding magazines in bushes. I don't know who's leaving magazines in bushes, but someone was. And it's
It was
just
a phenomenon. It happened in the
completely
80s. It happened.
yeah. It's just like a weird little unspoken yeah. uh, but you know, it's so different, and I think that is a massive part of the problem. You know, it's very easy for us to sit here and just sort of blame social media or blame the internet or whatever, but these are all realities of our lives, and we can't hide our children from it. They are digital natives, and we need to understand that world for, you know, in order to keep that line of communication open. It's no good just being like, no, you can't have it, or you know, I don't want to look at it, or I just can't think about it, or I don't understand technology. Like, our experiences are really different, and that should be our motivation for understanding their experience, because it's so much more hardcore, literally, no pun intended. 36% of first experiences of street harassment occur when girls are aged 13 to 14 years old, 26% 11 to 12 years old, and 10% under 10 years old. So why porn literacy? Just as we have the skills to process and understand the mainstream forms of media we consume, we need to apply the same thing to porn. Porn doesn't reflect real life sex that most people are having. So I think the onus here is on being able to talk to our children about the idea that porn is a performance. It's a business. It's been, you know, created for consumption, and it isn't going to reflect their sexual experiences, and it's not necessarily going to reflect, you know, say sex practices or consent, or, you know, reflect you know, our body. You know, it's usually kind of white, able-bodied, you know, thin, hairless. You know, there's all of these stereotypes, but, you know, I'm talking very broadly about kind of mainstream porn in this sense. You know, there are of course all kinds of things and all kinds of kinks and all kinds of bodies and all kinds of things happening, just as there are all kinds of sex acts. But most of the stuff that's being created for that kind of fast food, junk food sense is not really going to be representative of real sex, and it is performance, and you don't see all the in-betweens, and we don't see them. You know, we don't see the lighting, we don't see the camera crew, we don't see those conversations before about what you're going to do. Oh, you're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. None of that happens. So it's important to help them understand, just as we would any other form of mainstream media, to think critically about what they're seeing. So again, porn is performance. Ideally, consent is discussed, it's planned and choreographed. There's lots of prep beforehand. We don't see the outtakes. It's lit, directed, and involves lots of people in front and behind the lens. The majority of mainstream porn is directed, funded, shared, aimed at, and consumed by men for men, which is the male gaze and male pleasure. So if you don't know the term, the male gaze is, you know, for example, if we're talking porn more specifically, you're going to be looking at things as if, you know, the consumer would be looking at the porn as if they were the person potentially like having sex with the partner that's the camera's on. It would be centered around their pleasure. So men coming is usually paramount. Females coming is usually happens very quickly. They're coming to orgasm in a couple of minutes or something, which is just not real. And women are usually kind of centered as kind of facilitating the male pleasure, just as we've talked about in the RSE education. You know, the two things are kind of mirroring each other in that sense. So porn is as Marvel movies is life. Expecting your sex to look like porn is no different. It's easy to forget that performers are real people too. So that's not to say that you might be interested in trying to create. We know that watching porn does actually encourage people to recreate what they've seen in porn. So if you're looking at violent porn as a young kid, then you're going to be interested in recreating that, because that is what sex looks like to you. That's your first early experiences of understanding what sex is, what it looks, the mechanics of it are. You are more likely to try and potentially recreate that in real life, and that isn't going to be necessarily an intimate relation. It doesn't necessarily, sex doesn't necessarily have to be loving. You don't have to be in love with someone to have sex with them, but there should be an intimacy that leads to hopefully connection and ideally conversations around consent as well, that everybody's on board for what's happening. So I wanted to talk a little bit here today about ethical porn. Everyone on set is paid fairly in ethical porn. So there's a bit of a misnomer between sort of feminist porn and ethical porn. Feminist porn is usually sort of a bit more centered around the opposite of a male gaze, the female gaze and female pleasure. So it would center that experience more towards the women's experience. And again, I'm talking kind of cis heterosexual terms here. Obviously, we could talk more broadly about all kinds of different sexual proclivities, but then we would be here all night. So I have kind of focused this conversation a little bit more on mainstream cisgendered heterosexual pornography. But yeah, so feminist porn usually centers female gaze and female pleasure, and then the ethic there being that everybody would be paid fairly. There would be lots of conversations around consent and safe sex practices, whereas it is possible obviously to create porn with a male gaze that is still ethical, as long as everybody is being, again, treated fairly, paid fairly. I mean, women in porn usually get paid more than men, which is one of I think the only industry in which that actually happens. And that opens us up to a conversation about the sort of stereotypes and crappy representations of men in those situations, where they're potentially looking a bit like Neanderthals, and their role is maybe a little less important than the women, because the women are the focus in terms of the gaze. So it's not like it's not like anyone is doing any better in that situation. Like everybody's kind of everyone's losing out on representation in those examples. So in an ethical porn, consent is paramount. Sex is realistic and centers pleasure for everybody. Representation matters. It's made with diverse casts for diverse consumers, because mainstream porn also is very racist a lot of the time. How can I consume porn more ethically? Just as you make conscious decisions about choices about food, clothes, products, and mainstream entertainment, and consider values that go into your porn, into the porn you watch. Do you know who made it? Were the performers paid fairly? Is pleasure paramount? Or do you care about any of these questions? Like, maybe you don't. Maybe you just like, what, I'm just going to eat that Big Mac and not really care about it. But this is an opportunity to think about that. If something we consume, again, at huge levels, those stats, more hits in Pornhub than Twitter, Amazon, and Netflix combined per month. Like, we are all looking at it, we're all watching it, and we don't talk about it. But this is an opportunity to think about that billion-dollar industry and how we are interacting with it. So with your kids, what I'm very interested in with my project is understanding, we make ethical choices for our children in lots of other aspects of our lives. And I'm very interested in how this relates to how we might talk to them about porn also. There's a very good book called Good Pics, Bad Pics. And also I've got a load of resources that I can share with you, Jim, and you can potentially share out with everybody as well. So I can put that on the resource list. But just have a little think about descriptions around how you would talk to your kids about porn. And I would like to emphasize that whilst I'm not a sex educator specifically, like obviously I've spent the last year studying all of this and I do know a lot about what I'm talking about. But there are obviously lots of really great sex educators that I can point you towards who have a longer amount of experience than I do talking about this. But yeah, so what's the difference? The difference between porn and art, or the other imagery that we might look at, is intent. So the porn is intended, as we said, to be arousing. It's enticing. It's a product we consume. As I said before, when you're young, I think this can be really confusing. So it's important to help them understand if they do see something, the conflict internally might be very much like their physical response. They might be aroused by it, they might be interested in it, they might be inquisitive about it, all of which is completely natural. But their mental response could easily also be, one of confusion and even being scared, or just not especially if they see something particularly violent. So naming that and helping them understand that conflict of feelings is completely natural and completely normal, and that curiosity in itself is normal and okay, and that they shouldn't be afraid to be curious. It's just about, helping guide them in the ways to where they're going to aim that curiosity, which is ideally at you, so you can give them the right resources and have those conversations. So if they do see some anything on the internet untoward, if they do see pornography or imagery, sexual imagery, what is important, I think, beforehand, before this, well, let's not say that beforehand, at any point, before or after they see it, which they will see it, define it. So what makes it different from any other image that you might look at? Good pics, bad pics. Good pictures are, photos that we look at of, family holidays, cartoons on Netflix, whatever. But what is the bad pics? Something that makes you feel uneasy, something that maybe you're not sure what you're seeing, something a bit scary. So I'm just going to some water. Help define what it is that they're looking at, so that when they do see it, they can flag it up to you. Give them a warning. It's not what it looks like. It's not real sex. It's for adults, and you shouldn't really be seeing it. So make a plan for if you do. If you do see it, it's okay. You just turn it off or you walk away from it. You're not in trouble. You can tell us and come and find an adult, and then we can deal with the situation. So give them a tool set, the steps for a scenario. So if they do come across it, you've got a plan going forward what to do. One of the things that came up in a lot of my workshops with parents, where I would use, as I said, like imagery from artists who have looked at sort of various different aspects of sex and virginity, pornography, bodies, all kinds of things. But one of the really interesting questions that came up in those workshops was about making ethical choices for your kids. As I said, in other areas of life, we might buy we buy eco-friendly products, we pick small businesses, we make conscious parenting decisions, we try to do the right thing by them in all kinds of ways. And so I then started asking parents, well, would you pay to the good stuff, the ethically produced, the intimacy, the porn that is technically kind of good versus bad in front of your teen? One of the things that I'm really interested in is this idea of sex is sex ed. Porn is sex ed. When we don't talk to our children about sex education, and when our national career only goes so far, we are choosing to leave that gap in the middle is filled by porn, whether we like it or not. It is sex ed. They're all seeing it at age, and we have to kind of think about, okay, it's not going anywhere, it's $1 billion industry. How do you make sex ed? Is sort of what my project has sort of come to at this point, where I'm just asking this question of anyone because I think it's super interesting. Is there a way to turn this around for ourselves? There's an opportunity potentially within the boundaries of ethical and feminist porn to make sex education out of it, to show them consenting safe sex practices, to show them that it can be fun and intimate and loving. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is this idea of would anybody potentially essentially pay for ethical porn for their teens, to kind of try and avert them away from the online mainstream stuff.
Be fascinated if people wanted to put comments in
Yeah.
in the comments below, because that is a fascinating question, isn't it? And it makes a lot of sense, as you say. You'd pay for them to eat broccoli over McDonald's any day. So
Yeah, exactly. And I had
why doesn't
an
the principle
interesting
move?
Yeah. And I'd read a really interesting article about a woman who had said she was going to buy a vibrator for her 16-year-old daughter eventually, because she had decided, one of the workshops that I've done is masturbation for empowerment, and that is all about kind of learning about your own body and seeing, exploring yourself and understanding what you like, what you don't like, understanding that you can essentially get yourself off before you need anyone else to do it. Like if you can get to a point where you're like, I know what I like and I don't like, you can advocate for yourself in a partnered situation what you do like, and more importantly what you don't like. And also you're not relying, all those wonderful kind of butterflies in the stomach kind of experiences when you're first in your early sexual explorations. You don't then rely on someone else to do that for you. You're not kind of in your brain, you're not laying a groundwork where you're saying, oh, I need someone else to give that to me. If you can provide that for yourself, that can be a really, really powerful tool. So that's another question that I've sort of posed to parents, initially you get a lot of, oh, that sounds really extreme, but actually when you think about it, why wouldn't you want that for your child, for your girl or boy? Why wouldn't you want them understanding their bodies, having a good relationship with themselves, understanding that they can make themselves feel good, and therefore bringing that into partnered sex later? It's all of this stuff is proven to actually essentially delay sexual activity, partnered sexual activity. So the more healthy sex ed they have, the more they understand masturbation being a positive thing for themselves, it delays them then going into partnered sex until they're ready. All quite fascinating, I think.
Yeah, is there a kind of recommended time to start feeding these ideas in?
So I think, yeah, anytime really. I had a list here from a really good resource called Amaze, which I'll also put on the stuff that I'll send you. That they had talked about basically, they said there were 5 key milestones. One is if a child is using smartphones and has any access to devices or internet supervision, unsupervised supervision to the internet. If a child attends school, goes to school, has play dates, is anyone in anyone else's home. If the child consumes mainstream media, let's not forget that mainstream media is also extremely sexually suggestive, can be just as misogynistic or racist or whatever, depending on what you're consuming, maybe in a bit more of a drip feedy way, but it's all cumulative. Also, if your child has teens or tweens around them at any time, or if they're asking any questions about bodies or puberty or sex or any of it, which to me is a list of just kind of any age, I think, what's great about the new curriculum here is obviously for the really early years, you're not having these conversations with 5-year-olds, but they're laying the groundwork in terms of consent about, bodies and touch. And, I think that's definitely within sort of parenting spheres, a conversation that's, been had for a while, and it has kind of good foundations. So, I personally would say, anytime again that you're beginning to talk to them about puberty, that they are beginning to, see stuff online, social media, whatever. I had a horrible statistic yesterday that was 60% of under 13s have social media, even though legally you can't have it till you're 13. And I obviously assumed lots of kids do, but 60% was way higher than I had thought, which is a constant source of, I'm arguing with my 11-year-old about it all the time because she doesn't have any access to any of it. So yeah, I think the minute you're thinking about having any of these conversations, particularly about puberty, again, one of the differences between our experiences growing up is that we never really had tweens. That wasn't really a thing. But now a tween, sort of 8 to sort of 13, that's a really tricky age. And one of the things I found within the research I've done over the last year is that there's very little out there for that bracket. There's lots for this early years conversation around consent. There's lots for teenagers, 13, 14 and up, but there's very little in that bracket. But that is particularly for girls when they are starting puberty. Periods are starting earlier and earlier. Puberty is happening earlier and earlier. The stuff they consume is way more maybe not graphic, exactly the right word, but there's so much more there than there ever was for us. So I think whilst we might in our head sometimes think, oh, that's too young, it depends on the child, of course, and only you can know what's right for your kid and what they can handle in that conversation, but probably earlier than you'd like.
Yeah, we've had a message that said, my 9-year-old lad was caught looking up boobs on his laptop. I understand his curiosity, but terrified of what he could easily access. So this is kind of what you're talking about. If you start in those searches now, then there are more steps that come on from there, aren't there? Because that's the nature of the internet.
Absolutely. And that's a really normal thing for him to do. He's just a natural curiosity. He's not, it is really tricky. And I think, again, the important thing, the message that I would bring to this table is, you can't rely on anyone else. Your children always cite their parents as their main influence for sources of information and guidance on all kinds of things, sex in particular. Whereas interestingly, 80% of parents assume it's actually an outside influence. They assume it's their friends, the media, whatever. But we really are their biggest role models. The key things to understand is like when you are talking to them about things, your kind of body language, your tone is very important. You know, try not to freak out. Try not to have like you're telling them off. Because then it's going to shut down that conversation. You want to try and keep it as open as possible. Again, there's a really good set of videos that I'll send the links to that I would really highly recommend watching, only because if I regurgitate it here again, we could be here all night, but that will lay it out in a more succinct way. But the point is, again, think about your own, our interactions. Potentially, I had lots of parents in my workshops who think about the first time that they maybe had a conversation about masturbation with their parents and how they were shamed so much for, you know, talking about it or being caught doing it or looking at porn, and it shut that conversation down. And we all, you know, and we don't want to repeat that. We want to be able to open it up and be that safe space for our children to talk to us about it. So it's really important. You know, one of the things that I use art for is, you know, you may come to the workshops thinking I'm going to help you how to talk to your kids, but actually inevitably it becomes about thinking about yourself and your own experiences and how you feel and how you know, what you want to change for your kids compared to your own experiences. And just take that time to just think about it, do some research, maybe read a book. And more importantly as well, if you have a partner, if you're a partnered parent, talk to your partner as well. Like the amount of you know, I've done workshops where I've done workshops with mums and dads separately, and you know, there's couples who are like, oh, we've never discussed this, or we're really not on the same page, and that needs to be clarified and cleared up a bit too, because if you're both, you know, then saying very different things to your children, that's also very confusing for them. Sorry, there was on the screen, but I was gathering away.
Oh, it was sort of a similar thing. It's my stepson started searching for images of naked women and things like that, what to do next. So I guess that sort of feeds into the conversation that we've already had, really, hasn't it? And it's one of those things. I guess what this does is it is very easy to shut this down, and that's what generations have done for a long time. And any kind of awkward conversation, very easy to just go, I'd just rather not have it than have it and hope for the best. But talking about this is great, because it gives you that extra impetus to go, actually, you do need to do it. You do need to, and it is worth doing as well.
Yeah, and it's you know, porn in particular is a reality. It's the stuff, you know, it's here. It's the fact, you know, again, I think it's, I can't finish the sentence. Yeah, I was going to say it's like the fabric of of our society, but that's a little bit extreme. But you know, it really is a huge thing. It trickles into everything we do. And you know, one of the things that I particularly find interesting is, you know, those parents who have come of age around the sort of 90s, early 2000s, and sort of raunch culture and rape culture being really kind of in the seed of it there. And we're now seeing you know, the effect of that in terms of our perspective on sex and pornography versus our children then just being these digital natives who are seeing it so much earlier. Their experience is completely different, and I find that really interesting. I've done some really great workshops using kind of imagery from, you know, advertising, and just seeing kind of unpicking a little bit of like what the messages we were taking in at that point in when we were coming of age and we were teenagers versus, you know, the really extreme. Well, actually, surprisingly, some of it is really extreme, and we don't really realize. But actually, we were still exposed to quite a lot of sexual imagery and sexual media, and quite damaging messages, frankly, and that we internalize, which makes it hard for us to then potentially confront that now, or talk about those subjects now. So again, I would really advocate for just like thinking about your own practices. Maybe you want to make some more ethical choices in your own pornography consumption. Maybe you want to have that conversation with your partner if you have one. Maybe you want to think about, you know, past sexual experiences, or, you know, all kinds of things. And one of the things that's really great about using art for this is it's just such a great way into these conversations. It's a shame I mean, I can show you stuff, but I didn't want to assume that we'd had the time. But it's a great way of kind of sitting in a room, showing some imagery, some artwork, and it just takes it a little bit out of the personal initially, gives us all an external thing to look at and talk about around the same subject, and inevitably we all come back around to thinking about ourselves and our own reactions and our own thoughts and feelings about it. But art is a brilliant way into these conversations. And so what I often do is recommend getting like in postcards and putting them on your fridge or whatever. And then if your kid's like, oh, look at that, you know, that picture, that painting, whatever it is, that sculpture, and you can use that as a way into that conversation rather than being like, let's sit down and talk about porn.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it. Finding a way in is, yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it, I guess. There must be a huge issue, says this message, about body image with porn and kids seeing it. Is that
Yeah.
something that you found as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and again, it's not just a problem for women and girls. It's certainly a problem for men as well, and boys. You know, again, porn is performance. It's not real. There's, you know, often, you know, Viagra. There's lots and lots of surgery. I mean, one of the really horrible things is about kind of labiaplasty and vaginal rejuvenation being on the rise as a result of basically sort of, you know, silly this well, I was going to say pornified image of women essentially. Yeah, there's definitely huge problems and huge connections to it, because in the same way that the act of sex in pornography is performance, so is a lot of the bodies. And again, ethical porn, feminist porn is very much anti that. It's about, you know, real people, diverse bodies, body hair. You know, one of the other bigger problems, which I could do a whole separate thing on, is this, you know, the top searches for most things like Pornhub or any of these porn sites. It's basically MindGeek, or a Canadian company that own Pornhub and almost all of these porn streaming networks. They own almost all of it. And the top searches are things like teen, barely legal, stepdaughters, you know, tweens, even cheerleaders, babysitters, all the impetus being on young underage girls. Now, it's technically legal for them to have underage performers, but it's not illegal for those overage performers to be represented as underage. So it's fine to have a 18, 19, you know, 20, 25-year-old performer and have her look like she's 13, 15, you know, 12, whatever. It's not legal to represent it in that. And we're not even having a conversation about all the you know, unconsensual stuff that's put up on these sites, because anyone can put anything up there. So do you think because of the way dads
Yeah, so
made
this
some
is.
of porn wishes? Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it's kind of. Do you think that there's a reason we don't take it seriously, as seriously? Maybe is because, you know, it was sort of coming across porn. Pardon the pun. In the 80s was sort of a. It was more like a kind of like, whoa, silly. Oh, there you go. It's in a bush. You know, we found that. Or we found a VHS. Do you think that there might be why maybe people nowadays are not taking it seriously? Because obviously it has stepped up a gear, hasn't it? And kids
Yeah,
finding it now.
definitely. Yeah, I think, like I said before, I think the tech gap plays a huge part in this too. It's just very hard for us to understand. Like, it's easy for us to go, oh, just put your phone down, or like, oh, it doesn't matter, social media is not that important, or whatever. We don't have that relationship with it potentially that they do, but it's very much the air that they breathe, you know. And I do think that is a huge factor in this situation for sure. Yeah. And of course, as well, if you're not looking at lots of it, or you're not looking at something particularly, you know, that maybe has a rougher edge, or, you know, a violent edge or whatever, or whatever kinks, whatever, you know, whatever, if you're not that way inclined to be looking for it, then you don't know potentially what is out there. But again, anyone can put anything in front of your kid and it will find your children. You know, not to be too Mary Whitehouse about it, but it will. At the end of the day, the average age for seeing it, as I said at the beginning, is 9 to 11 years old.
Which is, yeah, I mean, that's one of the standout facts really from the stuff that you sent over when we were discussing this episode of the Dadless Soul Sessions.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so you're all right to put a load of resources together that we can share with the dads. Yeah.
Yes, I've started doing that. So I'm trying to put together great sex ed resources. Also, I will put some ethical porn sites. I've actually got some logins that I can share for the ethical porn site Bright Desires. So Karen, the woman that runs that, has very kindly given me some logins for free tasters, so you can go there and have a look at some ethical feminist porn and see how you like it. And maybe it will, even if you don't like what's on her site, there's lots of stuff out there. And you know, again, it'd be really interesting to know, completely anonymous feedback, but it'd be really interesting to know, you know, if now after this discussion or later down the road, you at any point you can get in touch with me if any of this kind of helps you rethink the way that you consume porn for yourself or want to talk to your kids about it. But yeah, so I'm going to put together online resources, books. I've got like a million books on all of this stuff, and I'd happily share artwork as well. I can happily share you imagery and artwork by artists that I found really effective in opening up conversations as well.
That'd be great. What I'm going to do, you've got a link to a survey, haven't you, that you want people to fill in if possible?
Yes. Do you want me to find that
Uh,
now, or?
I have the link, and I am just about to put
Okay.
it into the comments below this video, so so people will be able to kind of go and have a look at that. But that's kind of just to get people's reactions on what they've kind of seen
Yeah,
and what they
it's
think.
literally just 5 really simple questions as well, just to see what stuck with people and, you know, what they'd be interested in knowing more about, or what they didn't find interesting equally, if it wasn't helpful. It's literally just 5 questions. It's just so I can get a taster of, like, how to continue to, create this, you know, this project that will, you know, serve parents, essentially.
Okay, I've added that in the comments of this, and this video
Thank
obviously will
you.
stick around on our Dad's Only private group for well, forever. So so people can go and have a look at that. Thank you to Andrew, who says really informative, giving me lots of food for thought. Thanks for that. So if anyone else has any comments or anything that I want to say, please go to underneath this video. There's a comment, there's like a survey, I've just put it there, and go and help Lou out with that. But Lou, thank you so much. It's fascinating stuff, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. I have to say as well, I really love what you guys are doing. Like I said, I've done lots of work with dads, workshops with dads, and they really vary. And I think, you know, women are quite used to thinking about a lot of this stuff and opening up and talking about it maybe, but I think it's a newer thing in my experience so far at least, it's a newer thing for dads to really have those conversations with each other. And it's really important.
Yeah, it's great. I've learned a lot. There's a lot of food for thought there as well. And yeah, don't forget, if you know anyone who's in the group who maybe didn't get to catch this live, then get them to watch the video as well, because there's some great stuff there, I think, really important for dads going forwards.
And if anyone wants to
So
contact me about anything else, I mean, you know, I'm always here. I'm happy to talk about it all day long. So yeah.
I will stick your contact details around if people want them. Lou,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah,
Thanks for
if
having
there's
me.
yeah, no, it's been great. Really, really good. And yes, I'm sure appreciation from the entire Dadler Soul community as well. Right, so that is Dadler Soul Sessions for this month. We'll be back with another guest next month, who I've not booked yet. So who knows who it's going to be. I'm working on some people. I'm pushing them and prodding them and getting them to answer. And I will reveal that as soon as I know. Make sure you get on the Dadler Soul private group, and make sure you listen again to us next time. Next time we chat. Thank you very much.